During the 1800s and the early 1900s, America was ravaged by a deadly disease known by as the White Death, or, by medical terms, tuberculosis. This terrifying and very contagious plague, for which no cure existed, claimed entire families and sometimes entire towns. In 1900, Louisville, Kentucky had the highest tuberculosis death rate in America. Built on low swampland, the area was perfect breeding ground for disease. And in 1910, a hospital was constructed on a windswept hill in southern Jefferson County that had been designed to combat the horrific disease. The disease continued to run rampant through the region, and eventually, with donations of money and land, a new hospital was started in 1924, Waverly Tuberculosis. The new structure known as Waverly Hills opened 2 years later in 1926. It was considered the most advanced tuberculosis sanatorium in the country, but even then most of the patients succumbed to the disease. There was no medicine available at that time to treat the disease, and so many patients were offered rest, fresh air, and lots of nutrition. Sadly, the main use for the hospital was to isolate those who had come down with the disease and to keep them away from those who had not. Families were tragically divided, with parents and even children forced into the sanatorium with little contact with their loved ones. Treatments for tuberculosis were sometimes as bad as the disease itself. Some of the experiments that were conducted in such a cruel way seem barbaric by today's standards, but others are now common practice. Patients' lungs were exposed to ultraviolet lights to try to stop the spread of bacteria. This was done in the sunrooms, using artificial light in place of sunlight, or on the roof or open porches of the hospitals. Since fresh air was thought to also be a possible cure, patients were often placed in front of huge windows on the open porches, no matter what the season. Old photographs show patients lounging in chairs taking in the fresh air while literally covered with snow. Other treatments were less pleasant and much bloodier. Balloons would be surgically implanted into the lungs and then filled with air to expand them. Needless to say, this often had disastrous results, as did an operation where muscles and ribs were removed from a patient's chest to allow the lungs to expand further and let in more oxygen. This blood-soaked procedure was seen as a last resort, and many patients did not survive it. While the patients who survived both the disease and the treatment left Waverly Hills through their front door, many others left through what came to be known as the body chute. This enclosed tunnel for the dead led from the hospital to the railroad tracks at the bottom of the hill. Using a motorized rail and cable system, the bodies were lowered in secret to the waiting trains. This was done so the patients would not see how many were leaving the hospitals as corpses. Their mental health, the doctors believed, was just as important as their physical health. There are many inaccurate reports to how as many people died during the Waverly Hills decades of operation. Some claim that tens of thousands have died with the walls of the hospital, but this number is greatly exaggerated. According to Dr. J. Frank Stewart, a former assistant medical director at the hospital, the highest number of deaths to occur at Waverly Hills in a single year was 152. By 1955, those numbers had dropped to as low as 42 deaths, and it's been estimated, based on death certificates that were filed, the approximate 6,000 people died there, dating all the way back to the original hospital records from 1911. While far short of the numbers being tossed about in the legends, it's still a tremendous number of deaths to have occurred in a single structure. After many previous occupants and previous owners and very many remodels, by 2001 the once stately building had been nearly destroyed by time, the elements and the vandals who came here looking for a thrill. Waverly Hills had become the local haunted house, and it became a magnet for the homeless looking for shelter and teenagers who broke in looking for ghosts. The hospital soon gained a reputation for being haunted, and stories began to circulate of residents, ghosts like the little girl who is seen running up and down the third floor solarium. The little boy who was spotted with a leather ball, the hearse that appeared in the back of the building dropping off coffins, the woman with the bleeding wrist who cried for help, and others, visitors, told of slamming doors and lights in the windows as if power was still running through the buildings, strange sounds and eerie footsteps in empty rooms. Other legends told of a man in a white coat who was seen walking in the kitchen and the smell of cooking food that sometimes wafted through the room. The kitchen was a disaster. A room with broken windows and fallen plaster, broken tables and chairs, and puddles of water and debris that resulted from a leaking floor. The cafeteria had not fared much better. Even so, a number of people had reported footsteps in the room, a door swinging shut under its own power, and the smell of fresh baked bread in the air. Perhaps the greatest and most controversial legend of Waverly Hills was connected to the fifth floor of the building. This floor of the old hospital consisted of 2 nurses' stations, a pantry, a linen room, medicine room, and 2 medium-sized rooms on both sides of the 2 nurses' stations. One of these rooms, room 502, is the subject of many rumors and legends, and it's just about every curiosity seeker that had broken into Waverly Hills over the years wanted to see. This is where, according to the stories, people have seen shapes moving in the windows, have heard disembodied voices, and if the legends are to be believed, there have even been jumped to their deaths. There are a lot of legends about what went on in this part of the hospital, but perhaps the biggest misconception was that it was a floor used to house mentally ill tuberculosis patients. This was not the case. The patients here were not insane, nor were they confined to their rooms. They were free to move about, just like the patients on all the other floors of the hospital. This floor, thanks to its design, allowed patients to still benefit from the fresh air and sunshine that was believed to cure or at least extend the life of those with the disease. It was centered in the middle of the hospital in 2 wards, extending out from the nurses' station, and were glassed in on all sides and opened out into a patio roof. In 1932, another nurse who worked in the same room jumped from the roof patio and plunged several stories to her death. No one seems to know why she would have done this, but many have speculated that she may have actually been pushed over the edge. There are no records to indicate this, but rumors continue to persist. Those are the stories anyway. As with so many legends, no records exist to say that any of this actually happened. There are also conflicting accounts as to how the woman managed to hang herself. Some say that she did from a light fixture, others from a pipe over the door, and some say from the rafters. There are no rafters. The pipe over the door was a part of the sprinkler system installed in 1972. And the light fixture is hung on a light decorative chain that would not be able to hold the weight of a person. There's no actual documentation of either death, although some claim the stories were verified by a former staff member who died in 2006. According to the obituary, he was born in 1922, which would have made him 6 and 10 years old at the time of the alleged deaths that were connected to room 502. This makes his verification more than a little problematic. This story comes from a man who is a paranormal investigator. He went to Waverly Hills in the September of 2002, and this is his story of going through Waverly Hills. First time that I visited the hospital was in September 2002. I was in town for a convention, and a friend of mine who had been working with the owners at Waverly Hills offered to take me to see the place that I'd been hearing a lot about. At that point, the old hospital had been reopened for tours, but had not reached the level of infamy, quote for quote, that it has today. There had been no television shows, books, or websites dedicated to it in those days. It was a literally dark and stormy night when we arrived at the hospital, and it had been raining all day. I was looking forward to seeing the place no matter what the weather, and not because I was convinced that I would meet one of the former patients face to face. It was simply to experience the place for myself. By this time, I had traveled all over the country and had been to hundreds of places that were allegedly haunted, and I'd felt just the same way before exploring all of them, so Waverly Hills was no different. To me, it was just an old spooky building with fascinating history. The fact that it was alleged to be haunted simply added to the experience. I had long since abandoned the idea of expecting too much. After meeting with the owners, we went inside and started our exploration of the building. The building was almost silent. All that I could hear was the sound of our own footsteps, our hushed voices, and the drip of rain as it slipped through the cracks in the roof and splashed down onto the floor. I was given the full guided tour and saw the various rooms, the treatment areas, the kitchen, morgue, and on and on and on. We climbed the stairs to the top floor, and I saw the legendary room 502, as well as the lights of Louisville as they reflected off the low and ominous looking clouds that had gathered above the city. The only floor that we skipped over was the fourth, but my friend explained that it was the only floor in the building for which the entrance was kept locked and had saved it for last. When we finally arrived at the floor, I got the distinct feeling that something strange was in the air. I make absolutely no claims of any psychic ability whatsoever, but there was just something about this floor of the hospital that felt different than any other of the others. What had been nothing more than just an old ramshackle and broken down building suddenly seemed different. I can't really put into words what felt so strange about it, but it almost seemed to be a tangible presence and that I had not encountered anywhere else in the place, and right away eerie things started to happen. We had entered the floor in what I believe was the center of the building. Behind us was a wing that was told to not it was not safe to enter. Sections of floor had fallen in, and there was an area off limits to tourists and visitors. The strange thing about it was that both of us clearly heard the sounds of doors slamming from this part of the building. I can assure the reader that it was not the wind either. The wind was not strong enough that night to even have moved those heavy doors, and this clearly sounded as though someone was closing them very hard. When I questioned my friend about who else could be up there with us, he explained to me about how unsafe the floors were in that section. I investigated on my own and determined that he was correct. There was no one walking around on that part of the floor. The water damage was just too much. I switched off my flashlight and we walked down the corridor using the only dim ambient light from the outside. The hallway runs through the center of that building, and on either side of it are former patient rooms. Beyond the rooms is the porch area that opens to the outside. It was there where the patients were placed to take in the fresh air. There was no glass ever placed in the huge outer windows, which had always left the interior of the floor to the elements ever since, and on this night the windows also illuminated the corridor, thanks to the low-hanging clouds that glowed with the lights of Louisville. We walked down through the dark and murky corridor, and I began to see shadows that flickered back and forth. I assured that it was, just a trick of the eye, although likely caused by the lights or the wind moving something outside. But was where the corridor angled to the right that I got a look at something that was definitely not a trick of the eye. In order for you to understand what I saw, I have to explain that the hallway ahead of us continued straight for a short distance and then turned sharply to the right. In the early 1900s, most institutions of this type were designed in this manner. It was dubbed the batwing design, which meant that there was a main center in each building, and the wings extended right and then left and then angled again so that they would run slightly backward like a bird or a bat. Directly at the angle ahead of us was a doorway, and that led into a treatment room. I only noticed the doorway in the darkness because the dim light from the windows beyond it had caused it to glow slightly. This made it possible to miss since it was straight ahead of us. We took a few more steps. And then without warning, the clear and distinct silhouette of a man crossed the lighted doorway. It passed into the hallway and then vanished into a room on the other side of the corridor. I got a distinct look at the figure, and I know that it was a man and that he was wearing what appeared to be a long white drape that could have been a doctor's coat. The sighting only lasted a few seconds, but I knew what I had seen. And for some reason, it shocked me and startled me so badly that I let out a yell and grabbed a hold of my friend's jacket. I'm not sure why it affected me in that way, but perhaps it was the setting, the figure's sudden appearance, my own anxiety, or likely all of these things put together. Regardless, after my yell, I demanded that he turn on a light and help me to examine the room that the man had vanished into. After my initial fright, I became convinced that someone else was on the floor with us. My friend assured me we were the only ones there, but he did help me search for the intruder in an empty room with the only way in or out. There was no one there. Whoever that figure had been had utterly and completely vanished. I doubt that I was the first person to see this mysterious apparition on the fourth floor, and it's unlikely that I'll be the last. However, this sighting put Waverly Hills into a unique category for me, and that I will firmly state that I believe it's haunted. Usually for me to do that, I must have my own unexplainable experience that goes beyond a mere bump in the night or a spooky photograph. In this case, I had actually seen a ghost, and at the time I could count the ghost sightings that I had on 2 fingers. Waverly Hills is haunted, and for me, seeing was believing. How's it going, guys? Thank you for making it to the end of the video. So I actually really enjoyed this story today. I like the idea of haunted hospitals and stuff like that. As a matter of fact, I actually have one in my town that was actually for the same purpose. It was a TB hospital, and my grandmother actually worked in it. I've asked her several questions about it before in the past, but she doesn't have anything negative or positive to say about it. It was just a hospital, and it was just another job for her. However, though, back to this, I really enjoyed this story, and I hope you guys did too. So hopefully, you guys found this to be a very mellow story, and please subscribe and join the Mellowdite family. It would really mean a lot. I also wanted to say thank you for 1,000 views on my Wolfpack of Palmyra video. Holy crap. That is more than I ever thought I would ever reach. And please keep pumping those views. Please suggest on my channel to friends and whatever. Please, it would really mean a lot. At this point, anything can happen. 1,000 views on just one video is, honestly, I didn't even think it was going to get above 10. And you guys are continuing every day when I wake up and when I get home from work. You guys are just constantly just changing my perspective on this whole thing. I I don't have any words, but thank you. Really, it really means a lot to me, and hopefully, maybe one day if I do feel that this is definitely going somewhere, I will definitely try to put more quality and better things into these videos to make it more creepy. But anyway, thank you guys. Really appreciate it. Like, comment, and subscribe, and have a very mellow day.